Alright, grade 8, I hope that you're doing well. In today's session, we will just revise what I've taken last week and also continue in it. We have already spoken about the reading comprehension to fly, in which we are presenting the history of aviation. In this reading comprehension, it's an essay written by a man called Neil deGrasse Tyson. In his essay to fly, Neil Tyson, he addresses the long history of the human interest in and fascination with flight. Of course, flight is aviation or vice versa. Though flying was long considered impossible, Tyson points out that flight today is limited only by the laws of physics and also the technological know-how, meaning that we have only two limits for our ability to fly or to use aviation. The ability number one, or the limit number one, is the laws of physics that we have, and number two, the technological advance we know. Those two laws are the only thing that limits our ability to aviation. The author also, he traces the history of flight, including, of course, the Wright brothers in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. In 1903, attention to possibilities of flight increased over time, and by World War II, bomber airplanes were common, and the German V-2 missiles, which could be launched from hundreds of miles away from their targets. Of course, all of this speaks about the history of aviation and how at first they were included. He turns later again to speak about another turning point by bringing orbital technology. And we said that orbital technology, can you remember what is the meaning of orbital technology?
Yes.
Yeah, what is it?
It's about it's dealing with flying.
Yeah, but what sort of flying? When you have a fixed point, like planet Earth, for example, and you are orbiting it, meaning that you are flying in a specific orbit or a specific place. And the best example for orbital technology nowadays are the satellites in the space. All the satellites in the space fly on approximately 36,000 kilometers of the planet. So that's planet Earth, and here is the orbit for the satellites. And of course, right now we have hundreds and thousands of satellites in the space. So this orbital technology would reach by 1969. Apollo astronauts had landed on the moon, but what Tyson really feels is the greatest achievement is that of Voyager number 2, which is now in interstellar space. They are still in space, and everything they need shall be sent to them by rockets.
To Fly, from Space Chronicles by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Essay. Background. The history of human flight is closely tied to the history of speed. Flying has meant setting speed records. Heavy flying vehicles like airplanes have to move very quickly in order to stay in the air, and space shuttles have to travel at a very high speed called escape velocity to get into space. About the author. Neil.
So of course, about the history of human flight is closely tied to the history of speed. Why the history of speed? because simply the more you can go, the more you will be able to achieve. And to speak about aviation or about flight, human always tended and always to just tend to speed or to use aviation and the flight in order to shorten the distance between 2 points. Like, for example, before the invention of planes, all people used camels and horses in order to travel from one place to the other, and that took them many, many time. So they would always just look at the birds, how they work, and they really wanted to imitate them in order to shorten the distance between 2 points. And to speak about the escape velocity, I think we have already mentioned that before. Escape velocity is the speed that is needed to escape from the Earth's gravity. Escape velocity means the speed that is needed in order to escape from the Earth's gravity. About Neil Tyson.
Ross Tyson, born 1958, is an American astrophysicist, author, and science communicator, as well as the current director of the Hayden Planetarium's Rose Center for Earth and Space. From 2006 to 2011, he hosted the educational science show Nova Science Now on PBS. Tyson grew up in the Bronx and attended the Bronx High School of Science from 1972 to 1976, where he was the editor-in-chief of Physical Science, the school paper, and also the captain of the wrestling team. To fly from space.
So, of course, to speak about our author, we just tend to mention some information about his educational background. This man, he was an astrophysics, he was a science communicator, he was the director of the Hayden Planetarium's Rose Center. He attended the educational science show Nova. So all of this tells us about how well educated this man is. Besides, also how this man is really concerned with astronomy, physics, and all of these good stuff.
By Neil deGrasse Tyson. In ancient days, two aviators procured to themselves wings. Daedalus flew safely through the middle air and was duly honored in his landing. Icarus soared upwards to the sun till the wax melted which bound his wings, and his flight ended in a fiasco. In weighing their achievements, perhaps there is something to be said for Icarus. The classic authorities tell us, of course, that he was only doing a stunt, but I prefer to think of him as the man who certainly brought to light a serious constructional defect in the flying machines of his day, and we may at least hope to learn from his journey some hints to build a better machine. Sir Arthur Eddington, Stars and Atoms.
So once again,
One question.
yes.
I had to update my Windows 10. That's why I can't screen share. Can I still present my project?
Okay, you can send it to me and I can share it from my screen.
No. Now it works. Because I had to update my drivers for my video card.
Okay, since you just opened the topic, guys, by the way, the project must be handed and delivered by the end of next week, maximum. So start sending me your project this week and the week after. And you can present it after we finish the year.
Okay. Wait, projects or presentations?
Both.
Okay.
So, as we have spoken about this reading comprehension, we said that Tyson, he preferred to start his essay by using a quotation from Sir Arthur Eddington. And by quotation, we mean that when someone writes something and you just include that in your own writing, that's called a quotation. So, of course, this quotation speaks about how two men, two aviators, two pilots started to fly towards the sun using wings, but unfortunately because of the heat of the sun, the wax of their wings melted, and of course, the journey or the trip ended terribly. Why would he start his reading comprehension or his essay by such a quotation? Of course, this quotation helps us in just determining what are we about to know. So, number 2, is someone eager to read for millennia?
Can I read?
Yasin? Yes, you
For
can.
millennia, fly occupied human dreams and fantasies, waddling around on Earth's overhead. Perhaps we developed a form of wing envy. One might even call it wing worship.
Okay, so in paragraph number 2, Tyson here speaks about that how for millennia, 1,000 years, the idea of being able to fly occupied the human dreams and fantasies, meaning that all men were really and totally concerned with aviation and flight, and that they tried to do whatever they can in order just to be able to fly. Even some of the polytheistic civilization call it wing worship, like worshipping any creator or anything that can fly, that we can find in the civilizations of the polytheistic people. And polytheistic means to believe in more than one god. In paragraph number 3,
1827. For millennia, the idea of being able to fly occupied human dreams and fantasies. Waddling around on Earth's surface as majestic birds flew overhead, perhaps we developed a form of wing envy. One might even call it wing worship. You needn't look far for evidence. For most of the history of broadcast television in America, when a station signed off for the night, it didn't show somebody walking erect and bidding farewell. Instead, it would play the Star-Spangled Banner and show things that fly, such as birds soaring or Air Force jets whooshing by. The United States even adopted a flying predator as a symbol of its strength, the bald eagle, which appears on the back of the dollar bill, the quarter, the Kennedy half dollar, the Eisenhower dollar, and the Susan B. Anthony dollar. There's also one on the floor of the Oval Office in the White House. Our most famous superhero, Superman, can fly upon donning blue pantyhose and a red cape. When you die, if you qualify, you might just become an angel. And everybody knows that angels, at least the ones who have earned their wings, can fly. Then there's the winged horse Pegasus, the wing-footed Mercury, the aerodynamically unlikely Cupid, and Peter Pan and his fairy sidekick Tinkerbell.
so in paragraph number 3, our author or the writer here, Tyson, still speaks about the history of how aviation was always included in the human mind and also fantasies. He speaks about that you can find the people are totally interested in aviation since long, long ago. Like for at the first in the broadcast of any television, once any station needs to sign off to stop broadcasting, all they went or all they did was just showing off some birds or even the star spangled banner or some air forces jets, so anything that flies. And also to speak about flying, you will find out that the American people took the bald eagle as their symbol, and you will find that on their currency, the dollar, the half dollar, and the white or the Oval Office, anywhere, even their superheroes also. Superhero, the most famous superhero in America, of course, is Superman, and also he has the ability to fly. Yeah, even you have in some tales the horse Pegasus. He was a winged horse. You have Cupid in the ancient civilization of the Greek people. He was the god of love, and he was just an infant with wings. And also you have the story of Peter Pan, the boy who saved the other young children. Peter Pan also, he was able to fly. Okay, you have Tinkerbell also, she can fly. So you will find out that in every and all of the civilization of the American people, not only the American but also all people, they included wings in their own civilization because they have for millennia thought about aviations and flight as one of their most important topic to have.
Our inability to fly often goes unmentioned in textbook comparisons of human features with those of other species in the animal kingdom. Yet we are quick to use the word flightless as a synonym for hapless when describing such birds as the dodo and the booby, which tend to find themselves on the wrong end of evolutionary jokes. We did, however, ultimately learn to fly because of the technological ingenuity afforded by our human brains. And of course, while birds can fly, they are nonetheless stuck with bird brains. But this self-aggrandizing line of reasoning is somewhat flawed because it ignores all the millennia that we were technologically flightless.
So, once again, he speaks for millennia that people were unable in order to fly. That's why they found themselves like the dodo, for example, which is a bird that cannot fly, or the poopy, also a bird that cannot fly. And you can find out that those two birds actually found themselves at the wrong end of evolution jokes. How can you become a bird and you are not able to fly? And that actually was very bad because even we tend to describe ourselves before the invention of aviation as those birds. That's why we tend to call flightless is equals to hapless, like feeling a misery, feeling so bad, or unlucky. So those who are flightless, who cannot fly, are hapless, meaning that they are miserable or they are unlikely or unlucky. So all of this actually will help to introduce the topic, which is seeking aviation and how people took great interest in aviation. And we have the technological flightless, which for millennia started to change so that we can change into flight.
I remember as a student in junior high school reading that the famed physicist Lord Kelvin at the turn of the 20th century had argued the impossibility of self-propelled flight by any device that was heavier than air. Clearly, this was a myopic prediction. The one needn't have waited for the invention of the first airplanes to refute the essay's premise. One merely needed to look at birds, which have no trouble flying, and, last I checked, are all heavier than air.
So, simply at the beginning of aviation and flight, a physicist called Lord Kelvin, he just had that idea. How can any object which is heavier than the air be able to fly? So he thought that it's nearly impossible that any object heavier than air can fly. And of course, even that was before the invention of planes and aviation and all of that. But even at that time, one didn't need to take just a very long time to understand that what the physicist Lord Kelvin is wrong. Yet all you need to do is just to look out on the birds, because all birds are heavier than air, yet they can fly. So unfortunately, your thesis is wrong, Lord Kelvin. Paragraph number 6.
If something is not forbidden,
by the way, we have already read all of that, so we're just making a revision. That's why I'm just moving too fast.
By the laws of physics, then it is, in principle, possible, regardless of the limits of one's technological foresight. The speed of sound in air ranges from 700 to 800 miles per hour, depending on the atmospheric temperature. No law of physics prevents objects from going faster than Mach 1, the speed of sound. But before the sound barrier was broken in 1947 by Charles E. Chuck Yeager, piloting the Bell X-1, a U.S. Army rocket plane, much claptrap was written about the impossibility of objects moving faster than the speed of sound. Meanwhile, bullets fired by high-powered rifles had been breaking the sound barrier for more than a century. And the crack of a whip or the sound of a wet towel snapping at somebody's buttocks in the locker room is a mini-sonic boom, created by the end of the whip or the tip of the towel moving through the air faster than the speed of sound. Any limits to breaking the sound barrier were purely psychological and technological.
So, after he started speaking about the history of aviation and that all humans were totally interested in aviation and how some people even were against the idea of flying and that they thought it was very, very, very impossible. On the other hand, once we started to build planes and started our journey towards the sky, then we started to reach Mach 1, which is the speed of sound. So just why would you just start from directly someone who says flying is impossible because any object that is heavier than air cannot fly, to directly being able to fly and even reach the speed of Mach 1? Because what's in between is totally natural to develop. You started to fly by the Wright brothers, they built the first plane, and that's it. Once the first plane was made, then they started to take off by making it more and more capable of flying. So it's needless to just speak about the area between. So he just is going directly to the most important events. So after the people started to make their own planes, they now are starting to define the laws of physics. Once again, we have spoken about two important things that can limit our ability of aviation. Number one, the laws of physics, and number two, the technological law we have. Okay, so those two things are the only things that limit our abilities. So now, after people started to build their own planes and to experience aviation, they are trying to define number one, the laws of physics. So, in order to describe that, he started to speak about the ability of defining the laws of physics that was made in 1947 by a man called Charles E. Chunk. He was a Jaeger and he was piloting the jet called X-1. It was a rocket plane. So this rocket plane was the first in history to reach Mach 1, which is the speed of sound. And from this point on, people started to define the laws of physics more and more, that the objects are moving right now more than the speed of sound. And actually, in order to speak about that, he says it's pretty easy for any object to move using the speed of sound or even more than the speed of sound. Because if you just look at the tip of the towel, for example, if you have a towel that is dipped in water and you just hit it in the air. So the waves in the air can move even more than the speed of sound. Not only this, but also the bullets. We have the bullets long ago before aviation, before describing or even inventing the planes. And all bullets actually, they move breaking the sound barrier, and meaning that they are moving more than Mach 1. So it's pretty easy for us to define the laws of physics, yet once we are capable of and able to just know how. In paragraph number 7, once again, grade 8. All of that we have read last week. It's just a kind of revision. That's why I'm moving too fast.
Its lifetime, the fastest winged aircraft by far was the Space Shuttle, which, with the aid of detachable rockets and fuel tanks, exceeded Mach 203 on its way to orbit. Propulsionless on return, it fell back out of orbit, gliding safely down to Earth. Although other craft routinely travel many times faster than the speed of sound, none can travel faster than the speed of light. I speak not from a naivety about technology's future, but from a platform built upon the laws of physics, which apply on Earth as they do in the heavens. Credit the Apollo astronauts who went to the moon with attaining the highest speeds at which humans have ever flown, about 7 miles per second at the end of the rocket burn that lifted their craft beyond low Earth orbit. This is a paltry 1/125th of 1% of the speed of light. Actually, the real problem is not the moat that separates these two speeds, but the laws of physics that prevent any object from ever achieving the speed of light, no matter how inventive your technology. The sound barrier and the light barrier are not equivalent limits on invention. The Wright brothers of Ohio are of course.
In paragraph 7, he speaks about that how we started to move from Mach 1 to Mach 20, which is the most and the highest speed that we ever have had. And in order to do that, it was also for the rocket during its lifetime, the fastest winged aircraft by far was the Space Shuttle. Why the Space Shuttle? Because it was able to move at the speed of Mach 20, which we have never had before at any other of our technological equipments or even aircraft. So the highest speed that man have reached right now is Mach 20. And although that the craft routinely travels many times faster than the speed of sound, we have reached 20 times the speed of sound, yet none can travel faster than the speed of light. Because simply if you are breaking the barrier of the light, you will turn into energy. So you will cease to exist. That's why there is no object, no matter how technological advanced you are, yet it's nearly impossible to move faster the speed of light. And he tells us that he's not just naive to say about that, or we don't have the technology right now, and perhaps in the future we will be able to platform and do that, yet it's totally against the laws of physics. And once again, we're speaking about that the laws of physics are what just judge us and sees us to do something. So, because of the laws of physics, we will not be able to move faster than the speed of light. In paragraph number 8,
Generally credited with being first in flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, as that state's license plate slogan reminds us. But this claim needs to be further delineated. Wilbur and Orville Wright were the first to fly a heavier-than-air, engine-powered vehicle that carried a human being, Orville in this case, and that did not land at a lower elevation than its takeoff point. Previously, people had flown in balloon gondolas and in gliders and had executed controlled descents from the sides of cliffs, but none of those efforts would have made a bird jealous, nor would Wilbur and Orville's first trip have turned any bird heads. The first of their 4 flights, at 10:35 a.m. Eastern Time on December 17, 1903, lasted 12 seconds at an average speed of 6.8 miles per hour against a 30-mile-per-hour wind. The Wright Flyer, as it was called, had traveled 120 feet, not even the length of one wing on a Boeing 747.
So, to mention those who first started to fly, which are the Wright brothers. Of course, we have long before the Wright brothers some people who tried to experience aviation via very different ways, like Abbasibn Furnaz, for example. He had made some wings from cloth and he sewed them using threads, and he just jumped off a cliff. Unfortunately, he did not make the tail. That's why he fell and he died. But the Wright brothers are credited for having the first machine that can fly. And even before them, there were some people who started to put some designs, like Leonardo da Vinci, for example. He put the design for nowadays helicopter. Okay, yet he did not perform it. So the first machine, the first vehicle to define gravity and start aviation was the Wright brothers plane. And he speaks about how, while even doing so, this plane was not just anything, because they have traveled in 4 trips, only 120 feet. And this actually is not even the length of Boeing 747's wing. So that actually, although it was a huge achievement back then, but compared to what we have today in our technology advancement, that was actually nothing. It's considered to be totally nothing. Yeah? And actually, here we need to ask ourselves a question. So in paragraph 7, you start speaking about defining gravity and the speed of sound and all of that. And from start to speak about the speed of sound and how we can now define the speed of sound and even break its barrier, you are going back in time to the Wright brothers. Why is that? Why do you think that, guys? And that's the last question we're going to ask in this session. So why do you think he started first in paragraph 7 by mentioning how we are now technologically developed that we can reach Mach 20, and yet in paragraph 8 he goes back to the Wright brother? Why didn't he bring the Wright brothers first and then starts to speak about the technology advances we have? That's the last question we're going to have in this session. Who can answer it? Once again, why did Neil deGrasse Tyson starts in paragraph 7 to speak about our technology advancement right now, and in paragraph 8 he starts to speak about the history of that, which is the Wright brother, those who first started to build an airplane. Anyone?
Teacher, I have a question.
Yes, Atibi?
Yes, the project we presented the last week.
Next week.
Next week.
Yes.
So we present the project next week.
Yes.
And we are taking all of the exams. Quiz 3. Are we gonna take it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So once again, can anyone answer this question? Why did Neil deGrasse Tyson starts to speak in paragraph 7 about our technology advancement, and later in paragraph number 8 he will speak about the history of aviation with the Wright brother? Anyone? Okay, you can think about this question until the next session.